and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, tensions between Pakistan and India have been high as India fuels war hysteria across the border, blaming Pakistan prior to any concluding investigation over the Pulwama attack. Now, February 14th, 44 Central Reserve Police Force personnel were killed in a car suicide bombing in Pulwama district in the Indian-occupied Kashmir. Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan, while responding to remarks by the Indian Prime Minister, again reiterated his commitment to act immediately if India shared actionable intelligence over the Pulwama incident. This incident, having taken so many lives, was condemned across the board, not just around the world, but also by senior leaders in Pakistan. However, Pakistan has warned India of any military misadventure as Indian troops increase activities across the border, and the war hysteria continues to pick up in Indian media, social media, and across the board. Prime Minister Khan has urged India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi to give regional peace a chance once again, and he has reminded Modi of his promise not to allow any incident to derail peace efforts. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has also discussed India's unfounded allegations and provocative statements with foreign leaders. But the victims in this war rhetoric remains to be the Kashmiris. A complete shutdown from a curfew has brought life there to a standstill. People are queuing up for food supplies and fuel. Government hospitals have been ordered to stock up on medicines. There's a sense of silent panic taking over the region as locals worry about what is about to happen next. To find out more, the ground situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir and also where Pakistan and India are headed with their latest back and forth, let me welcome our guest today. First of all, I would like to welcome our guest, Mr. Zargar. He's a journalist. He will be joining us from Srinagar to give us an idea of what the situation is over there. And also, General Ziauddin Bhatt, a defense analyst. He is joining us from Lahore. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us here on Newswire. Let me start with you, General Ziauddin. The situation, you're briefed with the situation right now between India and Pakistan, and as a result, the Kashmiris continue to suffer. There's a sense of silent panic there. What do you make of what is about to happen?
I think the things are cooling down now, and initially there was a lot of chances of a war between the two countries, but I think sense has prevailed. And the two countries have started talking of peace. And I think what is going on in Kashmir is very unfair. And the young people are laying down their lives. About over 1 lakh people boys have been killed. So something has to be done. The two countries should sit down together. And in fact, the international agencies should take note of this and come out with a plan where you can bring peace in the whole area. And this cannot go on for long, and the people are getting killed, which is very, very unfair.
We've also, General Ziauddin, seen a sudden change of stance, if I may, of the Indian political leaders. We've seen Modi, who was very recently threatening of aggressive action towards Pakistan, suddenly saying that Prime Minister Khan is, if he, as he had promised earlier, will stay true to his word and let's fight poverty together. That's a bit of a change in stance, don't you feel?
Yes, this is a positive development, and I think sense has prevailed on both sides. Our Prime Minister from Pakistan has also given such statements where he says that we will take 2 steps if you take 1 step towards friendship and amity. So this is something which was required in this because the two are nuclear powers, and one cannot in this region you cannot afford a nuclear war. So this is now being understood, I think, on both sides, and internationally also by United States. There have been statements that we would not like to see a war between these two countries. So there is a tremendous opportunity of progress in the whole area if the two countries get along well together. But there are elements in both countries who do not want to have friendship, and they want to remember the past where they have been fighting with each other. 3 wars they have fought, and now they are waiting for the 4th round. So this will not help, and I think the statements which have come from Prime Minister Modi are a welcome statements, and the same such statements have been given by Prime Minister Imran Khan also. So
Right.
I am personally very hopeful that the things will improve and there will be amity in the whole region for times to come.
Right, there's also a news that came in that talked about how the Supreme Court of India had ordered the state chief secretaries to take affirmative action to stop the mobs from chasing Kashmiri citizens, because after the Pulwama attack, this is something we saw a lot of Kashmiris being persecuted on Indian soil. Do you think this might have triggered some kind of response, or the international community finally responding to how Pakistan has raised the issue is maybe changing their stance?
Yes, I think this is what I said. International community should take note of this, and a solution should be found of what is going on in the valley itself. And I think the sacrifices that the boys have made should be recognized. And instead of using force, they should use, I think, dialogue with all the boys.
Sorry to cut you, General Ziauddin. Last question to you very quickly, but do you have any hope that prior to the general elections in India, we can see any progress in this direction?
Yes, I think, and that is one of the reasons why Modi is going out of the way to appease his own people also. And the way he acted, he appeased the Dalits and others. I think he wants that there should be peace and before the elections, and he, of course, if he can bring peace in the region, then he is likely to succeed also in the elections.
All right, stay with us there, General. Let me come to you, Mr. Could you paint a picture for us of what is happening in Srinagar? We are getting reports, and the Newswire team has continuously tried to reach out to Hurriyat leaders and other journalists, and there has been this sense that they are unable to speak right now. There's a very tight curfew. They are underground. Is this a correct interpretation of the situation there? And could you expand a little on this for us?
Since the Pulwama attack happened, there is an uneasy calm prevailing in the valley, especially after government came with several orders directing the health and the foods department to be prepared for to stock up both drugs and medicines and other emergency material.
Would this be an unprecedented order at a time like this?
I won't say it's unprecedented, but it's unusual considering they also brought in additional troops from into the state. Again, that's not unprecedented, but the way everything was being, the entire optics of it created a sort of a paranoia within the state that something is brewing, and there was and both the administration and the police officials were confused and giving conflicting statement about why such orders came and why what was the reason of these directions.
So the governor, sorry to cut you here, but the state governor Satyapal Malik also gave a statement that the Kashmiris to the Kashmiris that clarifying what the reason behind this was, wasn't there?
He did. I mean, the governor's advisor came up with a press conference and explained that it was done, that the troop deployment was in relation with the upcoming elections in the national elections in India and in the state, and the directions regarding the foods and the medicine was in regards with the closure of the national highway. But what is more, what created this hysteria within the valley was the fact that there has been several instances when the highway gets closed for a week or so, but never have such orders came in such a hasty manner. What also added to this confusion was that there was a mass arrests of pro-independence leadership. The Jamaat, there was a crackdown on the socio-political organization Jamaat. The arrests are continuing till this time, and then the rumors about that the government of India might bring an ordinance scrapping Article 35A and Article 370, which essentially grants
sorry to
Kashmir a
cut you.
special status.
Sorry to interrupt, Haris. But before we get into Article 35A, let me try and understand: was there any kind of statement given out by the authorities, or why pro-independence activists were arrested? And I'm talking about here Abdul Ghani Bhatt and Shabir Shah, where there is now an entire social media campaign demanding that they be released and that they are being mistreated in jail.
Essentially, I mean, the crackdown on Jamaat and other pro-separatist leadership have been done in stating that these are precautions taken ahead of the upcoming polls, which are likely to be announced maybe in a week's time. The Election Commission of India team will visit the state and take stock of the measures and whether the polls can be conducted. And these arrests are being attributed to the same process to create a conducive atmosphere within the valley to hold the elections. What is important to understand is that the government of India has not been able to conduct by-poll elections in a seat left vacant almost a year ago, and in South Kashmir. So, considering the level of insecurity the police and the election officials may face, I think these arrests are being attributed as a measure to sort of create that atmosphere to conduct elections. The national elections are due now, and the state has to ensure that at least the national elections are done. They also have to take a call whether there is no state government at the moment, and they also have to take a call whether they are going to do the state and the national elections together, or whether the national elections will be held before the state elections are done. Yeah.
Mr. Haris, let's come back to the situation in Syria, but very quickly, General Ziauddin, I want to ask you the issue of the Article 35A now being heard by the Supreme Court of India. The Foreign Office of Pakistan has come out with a strong statement saying that they really would, that they're very against, they condemn the scrapping of 35A. Do you see any hope in the Supreme Court? Because there is one debate that losing 35A would essentially be harming the Indian Constitution itself. Do you have any confidence in the Supreme Court of India to take this objectively?
Yes, I think the India being the largest democracy today, it will go for such decisions where the interest of the state is kept in mind, and doing away with these rules and regulations, I think, will not help. But what is very worrying these days is the way the Kashmiris are being treated all over the country, and it's the leaders who can take care of this. The Kashmiri, I can see on the television, on the Indian television, that they are being persecuted all over the country, and they're not being allowed to study in the universities and colleges. Now, this is very unfair, and I think one call from the leaders can pacify all this, and it is the function of the leaders, and they are the ones who can control the temper and control the mood of the people. So I have great, I think, assurity that the largest democracy will come out with leaders who will bring peace in the country, and Kashmir solution will also be found by the leadership.
By the leadership. Thank you so much, General Ziauddin, for your contribution here on Newswire. Coming back to you, Mr. Haris, talking about the situation in Srinagar, the current situation, there is a shortage of fuel. There have been orders sent for food distribution to be to be done efficiently, and then, of course, the medicines to be stocked up. Can you talk a little about what happens in such a situation for the school-going children, for offices? Or is there a complete shutdown and life comes to a complete standstill?
There was a shutdown called yesterday in regards with the scrapping of the rumors regarding the scrapping of Article 35A, which is scheduled for in the Supreme Court today. The schools at this point are in vacations, winter vacations, and most of the children are not going to school at this point in time. But there have been orders as well asking the police force, the armed police force of the J&K police have been asked to be ready for any eventuality to make sure that any law and order situation might arise in case any such issue might arise.
Welcome, Lt.Gen. Naeem Khalid Lodhi. He's also a defense analyst. You're joining us from Islamabad. Welcome to Newswire. Let me quickly ask you, Pakistan's Foreign Office has condemned to repeal Article 35A that essentially changes the demographic of Indian-occupied Kashmir. What is your take on this? Which way do you think the hearing will go?
We were all thinking that what is the reason that this hype has been created and the timings and all these things, and we were counting everything else except this. At least it was not crossing my mind that about this article there's a hearing, these days, tomorrow, today, or I don't know. So this is yet another reason that, this thing has been created, or that hype is being maintained and even up. I don't know. The whole world is telling them that this is not the way that two neutral powers they behave. Our stance is quite mature, and whatever we have offered is, I think, quite logical. Everybody appreciates that. But from their side, there's no positive answer, not so far. So I'm sure that their leadership, especially their strategists, political leadership, military leadership, they do understand that what does it mean when you cross such thresholds between two nuclear powers. Actually, you can't imagine two nuclear powers going to war, but still they are all out to create this trouble. Let us see that sanity prevails. If it doesn't, I think the world must look at it. I'm sure that our Foreign Office is doing a good job. They are trying to sensitize everybody, the world. And there are some good vibes coming from the UNO also. Even President Trump has, restrained himself. So let us see and pray. But I think the other message also has been conveyed that if they carry out any mischief, the response from this side is going to be beyond their imagination. Right. And I just pray and hope that doesn't happen.
So, Lt.Gen. Naeem, the situation on hand, we're very clear with what is happening, but once again, the Kashmiris are the one who are suffering the most. Could this, is it a possibility that across the board in India, the voters are not attuned to the main victims of this war hysteria and what is happening between Pakistan and India?
Whereas I agree that initially, for the first 2 days especially, there was a lot of hysteria seen in Indian channels and the people and across the population. But now I have started listening to some sane voices. You must have also noticed that people are coming on media and they are indicating that what could be the results of such a standoff, and some of the voices are coming up that this couldn't have been engineered by Pakistan because of the timings, because it doesn't suit them. And I think our reaction, which was well poised and matured, that has also made an effect. So I hope that from within the Indian civil society, now the voices are coming up, which are advising Advani. Even some political leaders have advised him that they must, tone down their gestures and tone down all this, leveling of allegations. So hopefully this should increase with the passage of time, and maybe the whole thing subsides in a week or two. Right. I'm hoping that way.
All right. Thank you so much for your contribution here on News. With that, I'd like to welcome the former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Sardar Asif Ahmed Ali. Welcome to Newswire. Mr. Sardar, if you could shed some light on the ongoing debate that has been taking place, not only the analysis on what India is really up to. Is this a distraction from the Kashmir issue on the international spectrum, or is this still part of the election, trying to galvanize votes before the general elections in April?
You see, when this happened, in the incident, the horrible incident that killed so many people in Srinagar, I was the first person media approached. And my reaction to the incident is that it is none of the people who they are accusing will benefit from that act. Neither the Kashmiri people who are out on the streets and fighting for their independence in a peaceful fight, nor it will give anything to Pakistan, any kind of advantage. So there's only one entity or one human being who stands to gain from such incidents, and that is Narendra Modi. And that is what I said, that ultimately it will be Narendra Modi who thinks he will be beneficiary, and that's why he is the one who can be accused of such a horrible act against humanity. And as the time goes on, he tried to pass the responsibility onto Pakistan, to which our Prime Minister Imran Khan gave a suitable answer and made a very honest and a genuine offer of talks and cooperation in investigating the whole episode. Now, there was no response to this. And all that we were getting was accusations. In the meantime, I think there's been a reaction inside Kashmir. The entire Kashmiri leadership has condemned Modi for trying to politicize this incident. The Indian Congress Party, which is the biggest opposition party in India, that has criticized Modi's policy. And then at an international level, what Modi was hoping for, to isolate Pakistan, that has not happened. Now, what instead has happened is that Donald Trump, who was the biggest apologist for India, in two statements he sympathized with Pakistan, and he hoped that relations can improve between India and Pakistan. And he also said that we will try to mediate some sort of a solution.
Now, here I want to interject here and ask you something also related to it. There is a lot of backdoor diplomacy now we are hearing of between Pakistan and India. Do you have any hope for how this might turn out in our favor or India's favor, even basically peace for the region?
I think in one sense it has already turned in our favor, that Modi is completely isolated inside India and outside India too. He's been seen with the eye of skepticism, and everybody in the world, nobody in the world is prepared to isolate Pakistan. I was just saying that the Saudi foreign minister praised Pakistan while he was in New Delhi. So what sort of isolation is Modi thinks he's pushing us into? While I think it is Modi who's being isolated, it is Modi who's on the run.
So Modi continues to see isolation from international leaders as a result of his own actions. Thank you so much there, Mr. Sardar, Asif, Ahmed. Let me quickly come to you. We've got the last 30 seconds left, Haris. If you could give me an overview of your take, basically, on this rhetoric that India was trying to BJP was trying to galvanize votes, and as a result, what we're seeing in turn is not recognizing the indigenous movement in Kashmir. How do you see the way forward from here, especially from a Kashmiri point of view?
I think there is already a tone down in the rhetoric that was coming from Delhi, and we have to understand the country is going to elections in coming months, and Kashmir has been one big draw in the Modi's poll policy before when he was elected to power. He promised that he is going to scrap Article 370 and bring the Kashmir within the Indian main fold, which he hasn't been able to do. So it leaves him with very little, to go ahead with the kind of rhetoric he would have liked to going to the elections. I think post Pulwama, the Delhi has been caught on the back foot, and there seems a lot of indecision in exactly what they have to do, whether they are going to take on Pakistan or whether they're going to crack down on pro-independence leadership within. So as I said, it's a total confusion at this point in time, and there seems to be a policy failure at many levels, both internally and externally. So that sort of sums up. It's quite
sense of uncertainty prevails there. Thank you so much, Haris, for your views. And with that, we're going to take a quick short break. Stay with us. You're watching Newswire. Welcome back to Newswire. Now, a damning report by the UN declares 2018 to be the deadliest year for Afghan civilians in nearly a decade. There were 3,804 civilians killed in 2018 alone, and out of these, 927 were children. 37% of these casualties have been attributed to the Taliban and 20% to Daesh or the Islamic State Khorasan province. 14% of the deaths are because of actions taken by the Afghan forces and 6% to international military forces. Meanwhile, today in Doha, the Taliban political chief Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar will lead the latest round of peace talks between the United States and the Taliban. Now, the Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid has tweeted earlier that the main agenda of these talks will again be the end of the US-led foreign occupation of Afghanistan and also how to prevent future attacks on other countries from Afghanistan, something that Zalmay Khalilzad, the US Special Envoy to Afghanistan, had highlighted earlier. Now, Taliban has sent this high-powered delegation, which is led by its political affairs chief Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, who was released from a jail in Pakistan last October. Now, whether the issue of a complete ceasefire in light of the UN report on civilian casualties holds any significance or position in these conversations that are taking place on the negotiating table, we will have to see as the story develops. But so far, we have with us our guests who will highlight some of the issues on the ground regarding the report that has come in. And with that, I'd like to welcome Ms. Norah Niland, who has been the Director of Human Rights of United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. She's joining us right now from Geneva. And Dr. Orzala Ashraf Nemat, she's the Director of Afghanistan Research and Evaluation Unit. She's joining us here from Kabul. Welcome to the show to both of you. Let me start with you, Ms. Norah. The report that's come in is obviously shockingly bad. This is something that was expected, would you say, while you were operating in Afghanistan, or do you think the numbers added up when peace talk efforts started to show improvement?
Indeed. Good morning, and thanks for being on the show. This is a very important topic. As the report shows, the situation for civilians in Afghanistan continues to deteriorate. And you have talked about this past decade. Of course, the war has gone on for 4 decades, and it's only indeed about a decade ago, 2008, 2009, that in the UN we initiated the program to start documenting consistently the impact of war on civilians. And the purpose of that effort was to bring attention to it in a way that it would reduce the harm suffered by Afghan civilians. While I still have the floor, I mean, what this past year has also showed is that the ceasefire last June, if I get these dates correct, shows the hunger in Afghanistan. And this is not new, but there has always been a vast, deep demand that the war not persist, and that the way in which the war is conducted shows greater restraint in order that the safety of civilians is prioritized and their lives and that of their kids are protected. As you just mentioned, the impact of war on children is increasing, both in terms of direct battlefield deaths, but also in terms of the accumulated costs of war.
There is obviously, Dr. Norah, a generation of children who have grown up, been born in war, have grown up in war, have known no other reality. With all the different projects that you have done there in association with UNAMA, what are the challenges that you come across the most, or you came across the most in terms of how this has affected children there?
Well, first of all, I should say that I've worked in Afghanistan a few times, including, for example, during the period, what I call the Taliban regime period. I was there from early 1999 to the end of 2002. And in all my time in Afghanistan, and I left from my last deployment there in 2010, but I've been back a few times. And all my interaction with the people of Afghanistan is that they've been very conscious that the war was unacceptable and that the way it was conducted was unacceptable. And it's the Afghan people themselves that mobilized, for example, people like me and the human rights team in 2008 to start documenting more consistently the human costs of war. In terms of children, absolutely. As I mentioned a few moments ago, this is not a war that started with the American invasion in 2001 after 9/11. The war has gone on, as we all know, since 1978. So the cruelty of the war and the brutalizing effects of war over all these decades, in my own view, it's not possible to calculate. But talk to any Afghan and they can easily articulate and demonstrate how it has cost their families and their broader communities. I mean, I'm living, as you noted, here in Geneva, actually just outside Geneva, in the village where I live, small village. We have about 30 Afghans and other Kurds, people from Syria, who are asylum seekers. A war that is also pursued. I mean, this report is about the tactics and the conduct of hostilities, but of course, the wider picture shows the politics that drives the war. Perhaps that's not an element for discussion this morning, but we need to be clear that a lot of us have responsibility for the harm that the Afghan people.
So how do you, let me ask you this, sorry to interrupt you there, let me ask you this. You mentioned you were there in Afghanistan working on the ground during the Taliban regime. And even in this report, majority of the deaths attributed to an anti-government party was, Taliban was responsible for them. And now they're on the negotiating table, pushing their way through with only this one-point agenda where the foreign troops have to withdraw. How do you feel about their position on the being taken as a representative of, say, an important party in Afghanistan for peace talks?
I'm probably not in a strong position. As I said, I left Afghanistan in 2010. Ursula is probably better able to speak to that. And the Taliban, of course, as a movement, and in my own direct experience with them, that indeed is what come across. For example, one of the people I remember from 1999-2000 was Mullah Wakil, who is perhaps still in Kabul. So the Taliban having their one-point agenda, obviously that's inadequate to see a durable peace, but it's a good step. It is, in my view, I come from Ireland, where we also have a long history of war and the devastation of war. You know, having a dialogue and having a structured dialogue is an important step in the eventual, we hope, realization of peace that should happen obviously sooner rather than later. Concluding comment, I think it's up to the Afghan people. They're in the best position to demarcate the nature and the parameters of the peace that will be durable in Afghanistan.
Right. Stay with us there, Ms. Norah. Orzala, coming to you. You've been working also on the issues on the ground. How do you see this report coming out? Was it a complete surprise to you, or were you expecting worse numbers of 2018 in terms of casualties?
Well, the report was, of course, not a complete surprise. We are living on daily basis, experiencing suicide attacks, experiencing indiscriminate approaches to this war, as mentioned by Norah earlier. What is salient in this report, I think it highlights the fact that war has been intensified. So the intensification of the war is like one salient factor. Like there is an overall increase of 5% in comparison to 2017, but also in terms of deaths, there is an increase of 11%. It also shows the irresponsible kind of approaches to the war, for example, using of ambulance, like one of the most massive suicide attacks in Kabul city was when a large ambulance vehicle full of explosives was exploded right in front of a hospital. So it shows that the warring factions, the warring sides, particularly the Taliban side, have no principle whatsoever when it comes to humanitarian grounds in respecting those. And that also is something that needs to be, noted by those countries who are kind of in this mood of believing entirely that the Taliban are this mission. They have this mission of ending this war by ending the so-called occupation, as they call it.
Let me point out a couple of things that really caught my attention on this report, and I'm sure you will be able to comment on this, having worked there and having your interaction with the Taliban itself. The Taliban attacks on civilians have doubled since 2017. And also, furthermore, in the report, Taliban conducted a deliberate campaign intended to disrupt and undermine the electoral process. This is, of course, referring to the November report, or November 2018 report that the UN issued in preparation of the elections, and how the death toll and attacks by Taliban was seen to increase. How do you see their role then on the negotiating table with the US and other regional stakeholders in these peace talks that have been taking place?
Well, as a matter of fact, I see any sign of willingness to talk and to find a peaceful solution to this war as a positive step, whether it comes from Taliban or any other, criminal or terrorist organization or organization institutions using terrorism as form of, as a means to grab power. So talks to me is appreciable, even if it comes from the worst kind of people at the moment that we are dealing with, which are the ones who are targeting civilians, targeting them inside the mosques, targeting them inside the schools, targeting people on the streets, just normal and ordinary civilians. I think to me it's a positive sign if only this is a genuine sign that they really are willing to end this bloodshed. Afghans are tired of this war. Afghans are the 3-day ceasefire during Eid al-Fitr last year was a very naked and clear evidence that nobody is happy with this war, whether it is the Taliban side of the ground forces or the Afghan ordinary people. Everyone wants to end this bloodshed, but this bloodshed and ending it should not make us enter into a new form of war, which is leaving us with our monstrous, forces around in the region and trying to deal with them in the similar ways as the 90s, as we saw it, and we remember it very well.
Right, but where do you think Afghanistan is headed in terms of peace? Is there a possibility, in your view, is it a reasonable expectation, or do you think that there is a disconnect between the political leaders who are on these peace talks and the situation on the ground in terms of calling a complete ceasefire? Just today, a few hours earlier, we had again another report of a massive attack where over 24 Taliban fighters were killed, several civilians were killed. We're still getting an update on those numbers. But while they have peace talks, on the parallel, we see an escalation of violence.
So escalation of violence is in a way, unfortunately, linked to the peace talk, because both sides, whether it is government or anti-government sides, are trying to, according to themselves, sort of, are trying to speak from the position of power. And unfortunately and sadly, the position of power is interpreted by intensification of war over the civilians. That's why we see that 60,000 Afghans are being injured in a year. This number of injured is not a usual thing, particularly in a country with very limited health facilities and very high level of poverty, where families cannot even afford to treat their injured people. So both sides are in this competition of trying to intensify the war. Taliban are sending suicide bombers into the cities in the very crowded areas, and that's why the massive level of, you can see a massive level of an 11% increase is quite significant. Every single human being matters. If it doesn't matter to the world, it matters to us as Afghans. When we lose our younger generation, when we lose, our children, it's about our future. So looking into this intensification, one way to explain it is to look at how this means of escalation in war is kind of ending to the position of power. Moreover, as an Afghan who is part of the war generation and living all my life in the country and dealing with all the challenges, I can tell you that peace is not an event. We are expecting that something will come out of this latest so-called negotiations and attempts for peace, but peace is a process. And this process, the Afghan people in the local communities are very much trying to sort of get together and find peaceful solutions to this conflict. And Afghans are ready for it. The only challenge here is the regional commitment. What we are not seeing here is a genuine regional commitment by our neighboring countries, including Pakistan, including Iran, and by our far neighbors and by a larger world to make sure and to promise that they will not send weapons to Afghanistan that will be used for the killing of people. They will not send explosives that will be used for blowing people up. So that genuine regional and global consensus on war is not yet, on maintaining peace in Afghanistan is not yet there. And we definitely need that. Without that, there will not be any peace.
Okay, and here I'd like to welcome Ms. Amina Khan, also a senior researcher who is specializing on Afghanistan and FATA at the Institute of Strategic Studies in Islamabad. Welcome to the show, Ms. Amina. You must have seen the report that the UN has just published claiming the record high casualties of civilians in Afghanistan in 2018. And at the same time, we are seeing peace talks continue in Doha between Taliban and the US. So what is your take on this report? Do we see any future for the civilians, especially the Afghans on the ground, who are the major victims here in this war?
Well, look, the fact is that unfortunately, all the decades of war and conflict in Afghanistan, the only people that have actually suffered have been the civilians, whether it's children, whether it's women, whether it's the elderly. So, they have been the greatest sufferers, and hence the need for a peace and reconciliation process. Now, while of course the Taliban have been, responsible for much of the violence, you cannot also rule out the role that, the other terrorist groups have played, particularly the ISKP or the Islamic Movement of Khorasan province, who are taking advantage of the current conflict between Kabul as well as the Taliban. Apart from that, you've got the Afghan national security forces. And it's understood, unfortunately, that whenever there is conflict, there is collateral damage. And we've seen that with the US-NATO airstrikes, where initially, if we remember, in President Karzai's time, wedding ceremonies used to be bombarded and people were killed. So it's just something that's very unfortunate. But here I would just like to mention that I think it's very important now for the Taliban to adjust their views, particularly, and their practices when it comes to, civilian casualties. Because, they are no longer fighting a foreign force. At the end of the day, the Afghan National Security Forces are Afghans and Afghan civilians. So for them to justify their jihad and, say that they're killing, foreigners is it doesn't really have much weight in it, because it isn't now a foreign invasion as per se. They're fighting their own people. However, at the same time, I think it's also it's unfortunate, but collateral damage does take place.
That is a rhetoric, Ms. Amina, we hear a lot, especially when we talk about Afghanistan issues and why the casualties continue to rise despite efforts of peace that are taking place with major world leaders. And here, Ms. Norah, I want to come back to you, especially with in your opinion, do you feel that the numbers have gone up? The shocking numbers that we've seen for 2018, according to the UN report, could also be attributed to maybe a change in tactics or resurgence of Taliban and ISIL?
Well, I think the report is pretty clear in spelling out which warring party is responsible for the different types of tactics that have resulted in, and we're talking about battlefield deaths. Earlier I mentioned that there's a much wider level of human cost. And right now, the armed opposition, which comes in different factions or different groups, including the Taliban and the ISIS group, Daesh. So, of course, the tactics used by the different warring parties are directly responsible for the actual civilian cost.
Okay, Ms. Amina, what do you think would happen if, is there even a possibility that ceasefire could be brought up as an important factor of the peace talks taking place in Doha, so that at least somewhat this casualty number could go down?
Well, first of all, it is an important factor, and it has been raised. In fact, it is one of the main principles that is being negotiated upon, where Kabul as well as the Americans have been asking the Taliban to move into a ceasefire. Because if you remember the ceasefire that took place last year, there was apart from the attacks that took place by the ISKP, there wasn't any violence on the Taliban side, and hence there was no, retaliation from the Afghan National Security Forces. So this is an important aspect of the negotiations, and it has to be a prerequisite, because at the end of the day, it's the common civilian that is being killed and targeted. And I just want to point out that, while, the spike in violence, in civilian casualties has been because of, suicide attacks by, as the report claims, anti-government elements, one also has to look at, the increased harm that has come to civilians because of aerial and search operations by pro-government forces. And this is what the, report mentions. So, when you, unfortunately, as I said in the beginning as well, that when you have a conflict that's been going on for so long, you've got peace negotiations, but that does not mean that, the war on the ground is going to stop.
Exactly, that there will not be collateral damage. We've run out of time. Thank you so much, Ms. Amina, for your input there. And with that, we've come to the end of the show. Stay tuned to Indus.News for further news on what is happening in Afghanistan and in Doha as the peace talks continue. We'll be back tomorrow with a new Newswire.